So I want to do a video just talking about religion. I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses from the time when I was like 0 years old up to 19 years old, right? And then I changed my mind and basically decided all religions are not correct, right? And they may even be useful, but not correct, right? So the first thing is like, what really is religion, right? I mean, there's all different viewpoints. A lot of times people say they don't want to just, maybe they don't believe in religion, but they don't want to say straight up that all of them are wrong. I had a history teacher that just kind of believed, and she just kind of thought it was okay for you to believe whatever you want to believe. And ultimately, I think that's legit if you can do that. If you've got more of a scientific mind or more of a real logical mind, it's actually impossible for you to believe stuff that isn't actually true, right? It doesn't mean that you're always right about something, but it just means that you can't like fake yourself out. You can't use cognitive dissonance that much, right? So you're forced to basically believe things that are true, and your brain like won't accept stuff unless it is, right? It turns out it's actually useful sometimes if you can believe stuff that's not true, but if you've got that sort of engineering mind, you don't even really have the option. Okay, but the question is like, what is religion and why is it so popular if it's not true? And I think I'm going to go ahead and state that it's just, I mean, like none of them are true, and most people watching this are probably going to either agree with that or never agree with that. It doesn't matter. But my viewpoint is none of them are true, but it turns out a lot of them are useful, and if they weren't useful, they wouldn't be there. They would not have evolved if they were not useful. If you look at how evolution works, it tends to eliminate things that you're not using and keep things that you are using. For instance, if you're a mammal that you're on land, and then your species slowly migrates into water, like a whale, right? You actually lose some things that you used to have. You used to have legs that allowed they had like joints that moved, and you were running around with them on land, and then as you go into water, you kind of lost that ability, but you've got this nice fin in place of it. So just like animals evolve, entire societies of people evolve. Also, societies of ants and stuff like that evolve. Ants are one of the few species that actually form huge colonies like people do. So you can learn a lot from those guys, but that's another story. So what is religion really? It's a set of rules that people follow, and when those rules are followed, it does something for the society. Now, depending on the environment, it may be useful or not, and depending on the society itself and the circumstances and the level of technology, that particular set of rules, that particular religion may be useful or not. Right, but we have these religions. We had the really early religions. You see, these tribes like in Africa, they got religion. They do really strange things. I mean, to have circumcision as part of your religion seems kind of strange to me. They've got all these rituals. They got things where they believe in, volcano as God or whatever, and that the stories that they have, even though they're totally made up, even though the volcano is not God. Even stuff like that can actually be useful because it gives them like a framework to impose other rules, right? They can say, well, here's something, it's a god, even though it's not, it's a volcano, but people respect it as a god, and they can say, well, if you do this, God's happy, and if you do that, the god is mad, right? They can see that the volcano has a lot of power, so they associate a lot of power with the fake god, and then you can use that actual power that the volcano has to sort of map it onto ideas, and they can say, well, if you do this, the volcano gets mad at you, or not. Or in Christianity, you can do this, God will like this, or God will not, right? Christianity is way more advanced than the old, volcano God kind of thing. The problem with those old religions is you could, once science stepped in, you could pretty much tell the volcano wasn't really making decisions like that. So Christianity is more advanced. It's more like, okay, there's this invisible being that has a lot of power, right? And instead of a volcano squirting out magma, you say that, well, the evidence that this being has power is that he created everything, right? The fact is we don't really know who created everything. It's a big open question. We know that evolution happened, right? But we don't know where all the matter in the universe and the laws of physics actually came from. So that is a huge question. It's really interesting. There may be like some alien overlord of some kind, or some alien scientist that actually did create this stuff, and that might actually be a lot like the concept of God in a way. But the Judeo-Christian God that's outlined in the Bible, I mean, very probably doesn't exist, because very probably the Bible is just written by people, and there's really no strong evidence to support that it's anything other than that. But what I wanted to get into is really the interesting thing about religion is how it is useful, or has been useful to societies, even though it's mostly, it's honestly a bunch of lies and made up stuff, but it can actually benefit people. I mean, if you think about some of the laws of the ancient Israelites, even though they had no idea what was going on with medicine or microorganisms or any of that stuff, they made these laws where they're talking about people being clean and unclean, and basically saying you can't touch somebody who's unclean, and it actually was talking about diseases and stuff. So they're basically trying to limit diseases that can spread in a way that's totally legit scientifically, right? But they didn't understand any of the science. And if you don't understand any of the science, and you're trying to convince people to follow a certain set of rules, right? And it's not, that rule following is not already programmed into their DNA like it would be with a lot of other animals, right? We got people, so we've got programmable behavior. If you've got to program people to take certain actions, like avoid people who are sick, but you need some way to convey it to them, and you need some way to enforce it, right? And you don't have any way to explain it because you don't have modern science, but you've got like a good idea. It tends to get encoded into religion, and it's a lot like how patterns in nucleotide sequences get encoded into DNA. It's not because the process of evolution understands what the pattern should be, or that there's some ultimate truth that it understands. It's just like trying stuff out in the DNA, right? This process is just trying stuff out in the DNA and just keeping it and seeing what happens. And that's what happens with religions too, right? They put laws in there for people to follow. They've got structures in there so that they don't really want people to question what the laws are or whether they think they're true or not, right? If you go back to Adam and Eve, the story in the Bible, the big problem with Eve was she is eating from this thing called the tree of knowledge. And the idea is, if you're trusting knowledge, if you're trusting yourself or trusting knowledge, then you might get into trouble from a religious standpoint, because you're supposed to just be trusting God and trusting the word of God as ultimate truth, right? Because the way religion works is it's often a set of rules that for an individual either doesn't make sense or it's very difficult to understand. And they may not even benefit the individual, right? So if you make a law that says you should never commit murder, right? That's a good rule in many ways for an entire population or society full of people, because it's just easier to live if you're not getting murdered, right? But there might be some circumstances where one individual could benefit in some evil way by murdering someone. But if you've got to convince this person to not do something that would theoretically maybe benefit them, then you got to give them some kind of reason, right? Or at least it helps to give them some kind of reason to actually enforce this law. And one way to do that is by creating right religion. They're just something that evolved. I don't think anybody ever sat down and said, here, I'm going to create a religion. Here are the rules.